Did the Vatican just say yes to gay priests in Italy? That's what the headlines are currently saying. They're answering yes to that. And we're starting to see reports coming out, New York Times, The Guardian, and others making this claim. We're going to take a look at the actual document from the Italian Bishops' Conference that was approved by the Vatican. And we're going to see what was approved, what wasn't approved, and try to make heads or tails of this. We're already seeing comments by figures like controversial figures like Father James Martin. But then we're also seeing the Italian Bishops' Conference coming out and saying, actually, some of the headlines are fake news. And so we're going to take a look at all of that and see what the Italian Bishops' Conference actually said. Then we're going to see what they're saying about the media reports and all of that good stuff. It was a little hard to find the document, but I was able to retrieve it and get Google to translate it from Italian to English. This is brand new, just came out, so there aren't any official English translations just yet. So we're going to take a look at the document. We're also going to then compare it to what Pope Benedict decided in 2005, because there was another document from the Catholic Church, from the magisterium, approved by Pope Benedict in 2005 on the very question of whether or not homosexuals can be admitted to seminary. So all of that is in store today. Before we dive in, though, I do want to remind you, hit that subscribe button if you appreciate this channel and you want to see it grow and reach new people. Go ahead, hit the subscribe button and the like button. Let me share my screen and show you the first media report that I saw last night. I mean, this is just brand new, and you're probably going to be hearing a lot about it in the coming weeks or so, but it's hot off the press. I saw this from religionnews.com. A number of people on Twitter were sharing this, so I took a look at it. Vatican approves document allowing gay men to become priests in Italy. And I wanted to see, okay, well, what's their source? And they say a provisional document published by the Italian Bishops' Conference on Friday, yesterday, January 10th, and approved by the Vatican, cautiously opens the door for the ordination of openly gay men to the priesthood while maintaining the normal requirement of chastity. And here they're going to provide a quote. So let's look at the quote. In the formative process, when referring to homosexual tendencies, it's also appropriate not to reduce discernment only to this aspect. But as for every candidate, to grasp its meaning in the global framework of the young person's personality, the document reads, adding that the goal is for the candidate to know himself and find harmony between his human priestly vocation. Now, remember that quote, because it's going to be interesting what the previous sentence says that they did not include in this report. Unfortunately, they didn't, include any kind of link to the document itself, so I had to do some digging around, but fret not, I was able to find it because I went to the Dicastery for the Clergy on the Vatican website. I clicked on their website, and then I saw this article right here, The Formation of Priests and Churches in Italy, Guidelines and Norms for Seminaries, published on the 9th. Scrolled down, found the guidelines here, found the attachment, opened it up, and it's all in Italian, right? Because they haven't translated it into English just yet. But the part that you're going to want to focus on is paragraph 44 and paragraph 45. But the good news is I was able to get Google Translate to give me a copy of this, to translate it for me. So it's, it's not an official translation, but I think it's enough for us to make heads or tails of what's going on. And so let me just go ahead and share those two documents, or two screenshots, if you will, of what Google was able to show me. So here it is. In relation to persons with homosexual tendencies who approach seminaries or who discover this situation during their formation, in coherence with its own magisterium, the Church, while profoundly respecting the persons in question, cannot admit to seminary and to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, so those who are actively engaged in this, present deeply rooted homosexual tendencies. So these would be people who are not necessarily acting on it, but still they have a deep-seated or deeply rooted tendency for same-sex attraction, or support the so-called homosexual culture. Paging Father James Martin. So this is saying those people can't be admitted. People who practice it, people who have deep-rooted homosexual tendencies, and the so-called homosexual culture, those who are promoting it. This is the part that they didn't show you. This is the part that the media isn't showing you. This is the stuff that's before the quote that they're going to show you. This should sound familiar if you've ever read Ratzinger or Pope Benedict's 2005 document on this very question, which I'm going to pull up here in a moment, and we're going to compare them. Going to the next page here, though, because there's a little bit more. Let's take a look at it. The above mentioned persons find themselves, in fact, in a situation that seriously hinders correct relationships with men and women. In the formative process, when reference is made to homosexual tendencies, it's also appropriate not to reduce discernment to this aspect alone. Now, this is the part that the media is quoting for you. So you'll notice they didn't show you anything that I just showed you prior to that, right? They just go straight here. In the formative process, when reference is made to homosexual tendencies, it's also appropriate not to reduce discernment to this aspect alone, but as with every candidate, to grasp its meaning in the global framework of the young person's personality, so that by knowing oneself and integrating the objectives of the human and priestly vocation, one reaches a general harmony. The objective of the formation of the candidate for the priesthood in the effective sexual sphere is the ability to accept chastity and celibacy as a gift, to freely choose and to live responsibly. In other words, this person has to be celibate. The person that is admitted has to be celibate. In fact, it's not merely effective indication, but the synthesis of an attitude that expresses the opposite of possession. Chastity is the freedom from possession of all areas of life. Only when a love is chaste is it truly love. The love that wants to possess in the end always becomes dangerous, imprisons, suffocates, makes unhappy. God himself has loved man with a chaste love, leaving him free even to make mistakes to go against him. Furthermore, celibacy for the kingdom should not be understood as a gift to be recognized and verified in freedom, joy, generosity, and humility before admission to orders or first profession. This does not only mean controlling one's sexual impulses, but growing in a quality of evangelical relationships that go beyond forms of possessiveness that does not allow itself to be seized by competition and comparison with others who know how to guard with respect the boundaries of one's own and others' intimacy. Being aware of this fundamental and indispensable for realizing the commitment of or priestly vocation. But those who live their passion for the kingdom in celibacy should also become capable of motivating and renouncing it for frustrations, including the lack of emotional and sexual gratification. Good old Google Translate. Always hard to read and make heads or tails of. Not that it's entirely Google Translate, because bishops' conferences and the magisterium is notoriously verbose and often engages in this kind of word salad. So I don't think it's entirely just Google Translate. I think it's probably the author of the document as well. All right, but what are we getting out of this document? What did it effectively say? Okay, so what it effectively said is those who are actively engaging in homosexuality, or those who are not actively engaging in it but have a deep-seated tendency to homosexuality, or those who promote it, cannot be admitted to seminary. But it wants to make a distinction between people with that deep-seated tendency and those who are, to go back to the previous paragraph, those who have homosexual tendencies. It wants to make a distinction between homosexual tendencies and deep-seated homosexual tendencies. And here, one of my criticisms that I've often had about not just this document, but the church's position is that's the crack that many people are going to drive a whole truck through. The distinction between somebody who has a deep-seated tendency versus somebody who just kind of has that tendency. It might be fleeting, it might not be deep-seated, but might have it in one way or another. Maybe the difference would be this. Think about it like this. A person who has a deep-seated desire and tendency to constantly want to murder people, okay? Versus a person who never had that issue before, isn't really prone to wrath, but got really upset with this particular person and wanted to kill him. All right, that would be the difference between a deep-seated tendency and something that's a little bit more fleeting. That's the distinction that this document is trying to make. And it's saying the people with the deep-seated tendencies or people who are promoting it or people who are acting on it can't admit them. But the person who might have that tendency, but it's not deep-seated, they're not acting on it, they're not promoting it, well, those people could be admitted. And again, that's the crack that they're going to drive a whole truck through, and people are going to exploit that. And, a lot of people are going to end up approving people who do have that deep-seated tendency, or maybe even act on it, under the guise of this is not necessarily a deep-seated tendency. All right, this is one of the problems with this document. But is it a problem with this document alone? Is this new? That's what the news is telling us, that this is somehow, a change. In reality, it's exactly what Pope Benedict did too. So if you have a problem with this, you also need to have a problem with Pope Benedict from 2005. Because as I've showed this document before on this channel multiple times, this is exactly what the 2005 document does. I'll show it to you again for those of y'all who may not have seen it. Here it is. This is from, again, 2005. Instruction concerning the criteria for the discernment of vocations with regard to persons with homosexual tendencies in view of their admission to seminary and to holy orders. And you scroll down to the bottom here. Supreme Pontiff Benedict approved this instruction in 2005. So this is magisterial. This is Pope Benedict. And it's going to say the exact same thing that we just saw there from the Italian Bishops' Conference. For better or worse, it's going to say the same thing. Watch this. From the time of the Second Vatican Council until today, various documents of the Magisterium, especially the Catechism of the Catholic Church, have confirmed the teaching of the Church on homosexuality. The Catechism distinguishes between homosexual acts and homosexual tendencies. Regarding acts, it teaches that sacred scripture presents them as grave sins. The tradition has constantly considered them as intrinsically immoral and contrary to the natural law. Consequently, under no circumstances can they be approved. Deep-seated homosexual tendencies, listen to the language the document is using, which are found in a number of men and women, are also objectively disordered, and for those same people often constitute a trial. Such persons must be accepted with respect and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. They are called to fulfill God's will in their lives and to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter. In light of such teaching, the Dicastery, in accord with the Congregation for the Doctrine of Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments, believes it's necessary to state clearly that the Church, while profoundly respecting persons in question, cannot admit to seminary or to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, present deep-seated homosexual tendencies, or support the gay culture. Sound familiar? That's verbatim what this Italian Bishops' Conference said here, paragraph 44. Verbatim. It's a direct quote. They're quoting the 2005 document. Again, this is the part that the media is not going to show you. All right, so Ratzinger wants to say people who are actively engaged in it, have deep-seated tendencies, or support it can't be admitted. But the document in 2005 wants to say such persons, in fact, find themselves in a situation that gravely hinders them from relating correctly to men and women. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. But here's the crack that Benedict opened, and that a lot of people are going to drive that truck through, and that this Italian Bishops' Conference also reiterates. Different, however, would be the case in which one were dealing with homosexual tendencies that were only the expression of a transitory problem. For example, that of an adolescent not yet superseded. Nevertheless, such tendencies must be clearly overcome at least 3 years before ordination to the diaconate. In other words, the document that we see from the Italian Bishops' Conference is not new. It's explicitly reasserting what the church has already said in 2005 with zero difference. And the criticisms that we can level against this new document are the same criticisms we can level against Pope Benedict's 2005 document. It wants to make a distinction between deep-seated and fleeting tendencies. So you'll notice in 2005, it was still saying some gays could be admitted to seminary as long as they're not acting on it, as long as it's not deep-seated, as long as they're not promoting it, then those people could be admitted. So we've had this issue already since 2005, because that was the crack that Benedict opened. And you could argue a whole truck has been driven through that little tiny crack. You give an inch, people will take a mile. All right. So is this new? No, this is already something we saw with 2005. Are people going to show that to you in the media? No. Are there real criticisms about this document? Yes. Be that as it may, I want to now take a look at Father James Martin's comments on this new document. He sees it as something new, and in reality, it's already something Benedict did. But he sees it as something new. And then I'm going to take a look at the Italian Bishops Conference president just came out in the news and said the headlines are fake news. And he said people didn't read the immediate context, and the headlines that you're seeing aren't true. And he's basically going to reassert everything that I just told you. All right, so let me show you what Father James Martin is saying. It's from the New York Times. He says, this is the first time I've seen a Vatican-approved document. I've seen in a Vatican-approved document the suggestion that discernment about whether a gay man may enter the seminary cannot be determined simply by his sexual orientation. Is it really the first time? Because again, Benedict's saying it right here in 2005. Again, for better or worse, you might think that this is a horrible idea, but it's a horrible idea going back to Benedict at the very least. You could argue this was already going on even prior to Benedict, but Benedict gave the papal approbation to this in 2005 officially. So is it really new, or is it something that we already see with Benedict? I'll leave you to decide that. But he says, my reading of this, and it is only my reading, is that if a gay man is able to lead an emotionally healthy, chaste, and celibate life, he may be considered for admission to the seminary. Well, what Father James Martin neglected to tell you is the document still says those with a deep-seated homosexual tendency still can't be admitted. He left that part out. Is that intentional? Probably. It's probably intentional, because one might argue that Father James Martin does want people who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies admitted to seminary. So he conveniently left that part out of New York Times interview. But if we want to be thorough, you need to, again, read the document itself and not just go with what Father James Martin says. Now, is Pope Francis going to come back and reprimand Father James Martin for this? No, probably not. He'll probably write him a really nice letter. And that's part of the problem, right? So whenever you have someone like Father James Martin pull a stunt like this, every single time, instead of being disciplined, instead of being corrected, he'll probably be given a really nice letter. All right, so Italian Bishops Conference started seeing these reports yesterday. And so they just came out like 5 hours ago and said, all right, the headlines aren't true. That's according to this Catholic World News report that says Italian prelate bishops newspaper deny media reports on admission of gay men to seminaries. Well, you can't deny it, because there is a sense in which they are admitted into seminary. The same sense in which Benedict said they can be admitted. So you can't outright deny it, because there is some truth to it. But it's nothing new. The president of the Italian Bishops Episcopal Commission for the Clergy and Consecrated Life and the Italian Bishops newspaper have denied media reports that newly approved norms for the formation of Italian seminaries allow for the admission of gay men who are celibate to seminaries. Again, you cannot outright deny it, because it is partially true in the same sense that Benedict approved it. The norms on the non-admission of homosexual persons to the priesthood are not changing, according to an article. This clarification became necessary after a partial and non-contextualized reading by some press organs of paragraph 44 of the document that deals precisely with the theme of homosexuality. And so that's the part that I was showing y'all, where in paragraph 44, they read to you this part in the formative process. They read to you that part, but they didn't show you the two sentences prior to that at the very beginning of paragraph 44. For one reason or another, they didn't show that to you. Maybe because it wouldn't have given them the headlines that they wanted, or because these journalists aren't theologians, and so they don't know their left from their right, and so they're not even, or because they're not verifying it. I don't know. one reason or another, they didn't show that to you. The head of the Italian Bishops Conference is now telling you the same thing that I'm telling you. They're not showing you the context. Okay. The assertion that the paragraph allows for the admission of gay men to seminaries is not a correct reading, because the paragraph from the beginning reiterates the norms of the magisterium, said Bishop Stefano Manetti of Fiesole, the president of the Italian Bishops Episcopal Commission for the Clergy and Consecrated Life. In 2016, the Vatican's Congregation for the Clergy issued revised norms. These are from Pope Francis, which affirm the exact same thing that Benedict did. And another thing with those norms, we saw that controversy with Pope Francis a while back. Pope Francis reportedly again used a derogatory word when discussing gay seminarians. He says there's too much gayness going on in seminary. And he uses a different term starting with F and rhyming with maggot. I can't say it because YouTube will cancel me, but I think you understand what he's saying. It's also synonymous with a bundle of sticks. Okay. So he used that term. It was really controversial. He said, look, there's too much of this in seminary. He came out and apologized because there was a massive media storm crucifying him for it. And then he doubled down and used it again right after that. It's good old Pope Francis for you, right? So used it again. And then reiterated once again that the ones with deep-seated homosexual tendencies or those who are acting on it, all that stuff, can't be admitted. Okay. But as I pointed out at the time, I showed y'all that 2005 document that Francis confirmed. I showed y'all, but there's a crack in the armor here. And it's this one. Different would be the case in which one we're dealing with homosexual tendencies that were only the expression of a transitory problem. That's the crack they're going to drive a whole truck through. I told you at the time, you actually could have gays admitted into seminary if they meet this criteria. And that's what this new document from the Italian Episcopal Conference is doing. So I hope that this is helpful in telling you what has been approved, what hasn't been approved. To conclude, to reiterate all of that, to summarize it all, what we're seeing is people showing you only one part of this new document approved by the Italian Episcopal Conference, not showing you the two previous sentences prior to that. And those two previous sentences are the very same caveats that Pope Benedict has given in 2005 and Pope Francis has given in 2016 for admitting gays into seminary. Those caveats are people who are actively engaging in homosexuality cannot be admitted. People who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies cannot be admitted. People who are promoting the gay culture, paging Father James Martin, cannot be admitted. However, that 2005 document, reiterated in 2016, reiterated now by the Italian Bishops Conference, does affirm that homosexuals with more of a fleeting or transitory tendency can be admitted to seminary. So the very criticisms that we can offer of this Italian Episcopal Conference, we can level against Pope Francis in 2016, and we can level against Pope Benedict in 2005. So there's nothing new here, just more of the same problem. And that problem is you start making a distinction between deep-seated tendencies and those that are more transitory. I understand the difference conceptually, but you start making that in documents, people are going to drive a whole truck through that one little inch, and they're going to exploit that, and they'll use that to bring a whole bunch of people into seminary who likely shouldn't be in seminary. And that's arguably been done for a very long time now, even prior to 2005, and certainly since 2005. And you have more gas added to the fire, more fire, fuel to the fire, if you will, when you have people like Father James Martin out there trying to make it look like this is something new and not telling you the qualifications that the document gives. And of course, the Vatican won't come out and reprimand him, clarify further, discipline him. Frankly, I'm shocked. I'm honestly shocked. The Italian Episcopal Conference actually came out and clarified that the headlines are fake news. I'm surprised. Really? Since when do you guys actually come out and clarify anything? That would have been nice back during the whole Pachamama thing. Remember that scandal with the Italian Episcopal Conference and some of the Pachamama prayers they were posting? It would have been nice if they had came out with some clarifications at that time. And we rarely see clarifications coming from the church, unless it's in the other direction, unless it's a clarification to somehow make liberals happy. You know, if there's a huge controversy with the Vatican and liberals are really upset with the Vatican, you'll have a clarification from the Vatican that same day to appease the liberals. But if it's the other way around, you usually don't get any kind of clarification. And if you do, it might be weeks later when it's a day late, dollar short. In this case, though, I'm actually shocked. The Italian Episcopal Conference came out and made a statement. What, a day? Less than a day when the news breaks? Wow. Okay. Maybe they're starting to pay attention to the news now. I don't know. But let me grab this from the chat. Father Brown is in the chat. He says the reality is that for decades, the number of pro-LGBTQIA, is that a real acronym? I haven't seen the IA before. Plus, men interested in the seminary are diminishing greatly, at least in the U.S. That's good. That's good. If that's true, I'm glad to hear that. Looking through the chat, seeing else what we got. See some good discussions here about the Nephilim. Other discussions about Joseph, but not about the topic at hand. Let me see. I think there was a super chat. Let me grab that one. Thank you, Barbara. Cracks in trucks. Could you give a few examples? Sure. So again, if you make the distinction between somebody who has a deep-seated homosexual tendency and somebody who has a more transitory homosexual tendency, if you make that distinction, conceptually, I understand the difference. But when you make that distinction in a document, do you really think that that distinction is going to be respected, especially for persons with agenda? So if you got a guy who wants to admit homosexuals who have deep-seated tendencies and promote the culture, if you got a guy like that who's over the program for seminary, you think a guy like that won't exploit that distinction? And he'll just say, well, these seminarians, they don't have a deep-seated tendency. It was just kind of more of a transitory thing. And you think they won't use that to exploit it and then approve of people who have deep-seated and maybe ones who are actually acting on it and maybe ones who are promoting their culture? You think that won't happen? Of course it will happen. Of course it will. Can and has happened. So that's the crack in truck that I would point to, and my criticism of this document, of Benedict's document, of Francis's document, the whole nine. Matthew says, I love this document. Basically changes nothing. It does change nothing. But maybe it should have changed something, right? Maybe it should have changed. Maybe it should have shored up this problem here, where people can exploit that document through that distinction. Maybe it should have changed something. Okay. So I don't want to undersell that. I think that maybe it could have and should have. Great Wall says, how do they establish someone has deep-seated tendencies? Is that just a spiritual director making the decision? You're pointing to the problem. You're pointing to the problem. Isn't that going to be subjective to a degree? Well, I think this person doesn't have the deep-seated tendency, right? How do you define that? Of course, the document from Ratzinger doesn't tell you in any meaningful way how to define that. The Italian Episcopal Conference doesn't tell you that. The 2016 Francis document doesn't really. So yeah, the problem is people can kind of maneuver and say, well, it's not deep-seated, and because it's going to be based on subjective opinion. This is the problem. Ambiguity. Let's see what else we got in the chat. See some good questions, but they're not related to the stream. Okay, what else we got here? Is it good? In reference to the document? I think, as I've said multiple times here, there's some problems with this document. as there are with Francis's and Ratzinger's document. Big Stack agrees that people will exploit this. He says, sad but true. Josh V says people can't read anymore. Yeah, that's been the problem, right? I mean, and I kind of have to wonder, is that intentional at this point? You know, when people put out documents like this, I kind of wonder if some people know that people aren't going to read the actual document and they're just going to exploit things because people won't go to the primary sources, read in the context, understand distinctions, stuff like that. I kind of wonder if that's intentional on part of some people. Okay. Looking through, seeing if I can find anything else. Does the Vatican give any criteria for the deep-seated judgment? Not to my knowledge. If you find something, let me know. But here's the problem. If they want to give that context, they should have given it in the document, right? Where it's most relevant. If I'm telling you how to bake a cake and you want instructions on how to bake a cake, it's useless if I give you those instructions on a pizza box telling you how to make a pizza, right? Useless. I need to put those instructions on the cake box, right? So there's my analogy for you. Those instructions should be right here in the document, not somewhere else. Is that intentional? You know, that they don't put that there. Maybe I'm part of some. A lot of comments here in the comment section. Y'all are very engaged there. People will all calm down and this will be over because Michael has addressed it before it blew up. I doubt it very seriously. I mean, I've addressed a lot of things before things have come out and they still end up being, you know, huge controversies that people misunderstand. Okay, so why don't they pronounce the document by reading it and explaining it instead of just posting the document? I guess you're asking me why don't they have like a press conference reading the document to people? I don't know. Father Brown clarifies deep-seated has always been evaluated by frequency and intensity in conversations I've been part of for what it's worth. I can see that. Frequency and intensity. Sure. But where's the fine line between what we saw with Ratzinger saying in 2005, that of an adolescent not yet superseded? Where's the difference between that and maybe a frequency and intensity of an adolescent who has a deep-seated tendency, right? Is there a difference? I'm sure there is. Where is it? I don't think the document spells it out. And so that's going to be the problem. There's enough wiggle room there, enough ambiguity that people can just kind of exploit. And that's the issue. They don't really give you, okay, well, you've been dealing with it for this many years, or they don't give you any kind of concrete way to evaluate that. So it's going to be based on the person who's evaluating the seminarian candidates. And well, if that person already wants to admit people who have deep-seated tendencies, well, he's going to exploit that all day long. And honestly, I'm pretty sure the Italian Bishops' Conference knows that, and the Vatican knows that. How could they not? Here's a thought. Couldn't people lie about their tendencies? Of course they could. And I'm sure that's a problem as well. If a deep-seated homosexual man were to present himself for ordination, would it be invalid or illicit? It would still be valid, but it would be illicit. But we've had a problem in the Catholic Church with homosexual clergy. I mean, you can see this as an issue in the Middle Ages, the medieval period. St. Peter Damian wrote a whole treatise against homosexuality in the clergy, and obviously those were validly ordained people. So the clarification was, yeah, like a press conference. Why don't they have a press conference? I don't know. If they did, would it really help anyway? I think my criticisms would still remain. Father Brown says, you're definitely right on it, just ultimately being a judgment call. Yeah, and again, that's the problem, and I think they know that's the problem, and I think they want that wiggle room to exploit it. At least some people do. I'm sure there's some people who don't, but I think some people want that wiggle room. But isn't this a problem with a lot of these prudential judgments on the part of the magisterium? It seems like this has been a problem. I mean, you can't even blame it entirely on Francis. We've had this problem with Benedict. We've had this problem with John Paul II. And I'm not even saying it's new to the post-conciliar period. You have ambiguity in magisterial documents of prudential judgments in the pre-conciliar period, in the patristic period, in the first millennium, ecumenical councils. This has always been a problem with the magisterium. Paul says Father Brown is a good Jesuit. There you go. Zachary says there should be a super detailed rubric that doesn't make subjective and a matter of opinion. I agree, but I think that's intentional, that there isn't one. I think that's intentional, and that's part of the problem. This could easily be fixed if there was a real intention to fix it. Am I going to do a stream on Mel Gibson and Rogan? Yes, I will. I was actually intending to do that today, but got caught up with this affair. So I'll probably do it Monday because I got another show coming up here in about an hour and a half. You had this problem before Vatican II. McCarrick entered seminary in 50. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly been a problem. You can't look at the pre-conciliar period with some kind of rose-colored glasses. It's been an issue in the church since day one, really. By the way, I did see that the case for McCarrick, one of his trials, one of his court cases, I just saw today, according to Rome Reports, it looks like the judge said since he is senile and can't actually defend himself, the case will remain open until his death, but nothing's going to happen. So he's not going to be tried, but the case will remain open until he dies because something stupid about how their state law works. So in other words, nothing's ever going to come from it. He's not going to be tried. Paul says, I think your video on Chalcedon pointed out how it had ambiguity that later needed to be addressed. Yep. And it's not just Chalcedon. Jimmy says, rubric on a scale of 1 to 10. How gay are you? I don't know if that would fix it either. Michael, don't you feel that this is such a confusing thing to approve? Sure. Yeah, I think that there is some confusion here, and I think that confusion is probably intentional on part of some, as I've said multiple times here. They don't just ask, is you is or is you ain't? Yeah. No, that won't be sufficient, though. Yeah, sorry. He had dementia, not being... Yeah, okay. McCarrick had dementia, so he cannot be tried. We do have the McCarrick report, though. True, which I reviewed on this show, and I showed you its connections to Vigano. Does this apply to Eastern churches as well? Okay, well, the Italian Episcopal Conference is going to be for Latin, right? However, the document that was approved in 2005 and 2016 by Benedict and then Francis, that would be for everyone, if I'm not mistaken. Cherubim asks, how can it be valid if the homosexuals lied to the church and intended to be chaste? There's a difference between liceity and validity. For a sacrament to be valid, whether someone lies or not is not relevant because there's a notion known as ex opere operato, that the sacrament is confected by the act itself, the actor or the minister, because the doctrine is that it's Christ acting through the minister, so it relies on Jesus, not on the recipient, to a degree. In this particular case, it would rely obviously on the minister and not the recipient. So if the recipient lies, it would still be confected. Now, if you had a person who's actually a female lie about their gender and you have someone intend to ordain them, um, that lie would be relevant because now the matter has changed. But in this particular case, a lie doesn't change the matter, therefore it doesn't change the validity. But it does impact lyceity, whether this is lawful or not. Josh says my confirmation is on September 11th. Congrats. Glad to hear that. Okay. I think I grabbed everything. Glenda asks, sorry, coming in late, and them denying the gay men admission to priesthood in part, any admission would no longer be considered gay. I don't know what you're asking. I apologize. I don't know what you're asking. But I will say this, wrapping it up, I do think that the Italian Episcopal Conference and what they're saying here is a little misleading. They are right to say that the media reports are fake news, but they're wrong to say that this doesn't mean that gays could be admitted to seminary because, again, Ratzinger, Francis, and this document does allow for it with the qualifications that I've given. So they're also not fully explaining the situation correctly, and that's part of the problem, right? I mean, you got your Father James Martins trying to spin it, and then you got others trying to spin it, right, in kind of an opposite direction and downplaying it. And I want to say, well, actually, the truth is in the middle. It's not what your Father James Martins are saying. It's not what others are saying, but it's actually somewhere here in the middle. That's what I hope that I have presented to you today in this stream, is a balanced take on what's really going on. So whenever you see the headlines, you can know what this is and what it isn't. Do I think Martin should be excommunicated? If not, why? Should he be excommunicated? I think that the church should go ahead and engage in the disciplinary process with him. And if he remains obstinate and doesn't comply, how would you not excommunicate such a person, right? Okay. Well, I think I grabbed everything else that is relevant there in the chat. Thank y'all so much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, share this with other people that you see. So if you see people sharing this on Twitter, the media report, send them my video to help them make sense of what this is, so that they can get a good and balanced take, which I hope I have presented to you today. And if I have, let me know by hitting the subscribe button. Let me know by hitting the like button. Let me know through your comments in the comment section, and by sharing it on your social media with other people who may be confused and see these reports. Let me know that I'm actually offering something that is valuable and helpful to people, because if I'm not, believe me, there's numerous other things that I could be doing with my time. So if I'm not seeing people benefiting from this, I will just move on and address other issues that are beneficial to people. But if people are finding this helpful, I need to see your feedback. I need to see it in your subscriptions. I need to see it in your likes. I need to see it in your comments, and also in your financial support. Great way to support me is patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll get access to extra content, and you'll enable me to continue to do what I'm doing. All right, that's going to do it. See y'all in just a little bit for another show. God bless. Are you seeking clarity in the midst of confusion about Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism? In my book, Answering Orthodoxy, I offer a biblical and historical response to the most common objections that Eastern Orthodox offer against the Catholic Church. This book is for anyone searching for the truth, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, or simply trying to make sense of the differences between Catholics and Orthodox. Order your copy today and discover the rational, biblical, and historical basis for the Catholic Church. Visit Amazon to order your copy today. Are you ready to deepen your faith and sharpen your understanding of theology? Welcome to the Center for Theological Research, your gateway to transformative learning. At CTR, you will find in-depth courses designed to equip you with the tools to grow in your understanding of the faith. Explore courses like the 7 Ecumenical Councils and uncover the foundational truths that shape Christianity. Master the ability to determine the level of a doctrine in the Theological Notes course. And in the Logical Fallacies and Apologetics course, you'll learn to spot the logical errors often encountered in non-Catholic apologetics content. Also, check out the ebooks that are available to you for free. Start your journey today. Visit ctresearch.org and take the next step in your faith formation. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/Reason and Theology.